What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Thomas, bringing you another edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm very excited to get started with tonight's show. I'm going to be talking about the now co-main event for UFC 209. Khabib Nurmagomedov will take on Tony Ferguson in an interim belt for the UFC lightweight strap. Very exciting stuff. The winner of this fight will most likely face Conor McGregor in Conor McGregor's first UFC lightweight title defense. This fight was a fight that's been in the making for quite some time. It was actually supposed to happen well before Conor McGregor won the UFC lightweight belt, practically almost before, or maybe right after Conor McGregor won the featherweight belt over a year ago, and it just never happened. Either Khabib would get hurt or Tony would get hurt, and they went their separate ways. Tony Ferguson had a dominant win over the former champion Rafael dos Anjos, and Khabib Nurmagomedov had a dominant win over Michael Johnson at UFC 205. So now they are on a full collision course, and this is the biggest fight for both men in their mixed martial arts careers. Tony Ferguson, the former Ultimate Fighter winner, Khabib Nurmagomedov, still the undefeated Sambo fighter from Russia, the fighter that everyone knows that no one wants to fight. And Tony Ferguson was willing to oblige. And as far as this fight goes, it's two completely different contrasting styles. You have Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is a wrestler, purely a wrestler, a guy that is one of the best wrestlers in mixed martial arts, almost getting the takedown at will in multiple fights. And then you have Tony Ferguson, who is a long, rangy boxer-type fighter that is fantastic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So we will see styles collide. Styles do make fights, and that is why this fight will be an interesting one. Do I think that this is the right fight? Yes, I do. Conor McGregor is going to be taking some time off due to the birth of his first child. And I think Conor McGregor wants to sit on his double champ status for a little while. Even though he is no longer the UFC featherweight champion, I think he wants to bask in his glory, bathe in it for a little while, and then come back when he feels good and ready. I honestly don't see much left in the tank for Conor McGregor, and I've said this to a lot of people, and they kind of look at me like, really? Why is that? And the reason why was a few years ago, not a few years ago, maybe a year ago. His sparring partner from SBG Ireland fought another fighter in a regional promotion, and that fighter actually died. His opponent died shortly after the fight due to brain trauma. And I think that that's something that Conor is aware of now, that he's made, upwards of 30, 40 million in endorsements and his money in his UFC fights combined, and he's a huge name. He's got the nicest cars, he's got the mansions, everyone loves him. So what is the point when you've already won 2 titles in 2 different weight classes? You've smashed every single pay-per-view record in mixed martial arts history. You're the number 1 draw in the history of mixed martial arts. So what is the reward? I think he does have some unfinished business. I do think he still has, a few fights that need to be had, need to be seen. One of them being the winner of this Khabib versus Tony fight, and the other being the Nate Diaz trilogy fight. And that's a good segue right there. That's a segue right there. So I do think this Khabib-Tony Ferguson fight is the right fight at the right time. I also I'm very glad that this is the fight that's happening right now. But I hope that, whether the winner or loser of this fight, or whether the winner gets the next shot versus Conor McGregor or not, I hope if that person does get the next shot, along the way, we do see Conor fight Nate Diaz a third time. Like Khabib beats Tony Ferguson, maybe it's a 3-round war and it's a decision and Khabib wins, or maybe it's a 3-round war and Ferguson wins, so he's got to be put on ice for a little while. If one of these fighters has to come out of this on ice, then I think that they should make that Conor versus Nate Diaz trilogy fight for the UFC lightweight belt. Conor McGregor alluded to that after the second fight, alluding to the fight being at 155 pounds for the third fight, with a strap on the line. Now that Conor took that strap from Eddie Alvarez, that would make that fight the biggest fight in mixed martial arts history. The biggest fight ever in the history of mixed martial arts would be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, and it would take quite some time for any other fight to surpass that record. But these two challengers, Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, have been really underutilized within the UFC, really underutilized in terms of their fighting track record. Khabib Nurmagomedov had his fair share of injuries. Tony Ferguson kind of wanted that shot against one of the legitimate top 10 contenders, and now he's actually getting that shot. After beating Rafael dos Anjos, he's won, I think, 8 or 9 fights in a row. So Tony Ferguson is the real deal. He hits very hard. He's got beautiful technique in terms of his Muay Thai striking, his boxing, his clinch, and his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which we haven't really seen the likes of at the UFC lightweight division in quite some time. Khabib Nurmagomedov, if Khabib Nurmagomedov double legs Tony Ferguson, is it a guarantee that he will or won't get submitted? Only time will tell. This is a great matchup. Huge amounts of trash talk have ensued between Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov, to the point where Tony Ferguson actually was offered $200,000 by Khabib Nurmagomedov to take this fight. So, very interesting stuff. This UFC lightweight division is no joke. This is a division that has been one of the best divisions in the history of the sport since its inception. And the guy responsible for that will be fighting on January 15th, BJ Penn, at featherweight. But had it not been for BJ Penn, this UFC lightweight division wouldn't even be relevant. So it's kind of fitting that this news comes out at a point where BJ Penn will be fighting very soon. So besides Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, Khabib is ranked first, Tony is ranked second, and then you have the champ ranked at the top, Conor McGregor. And Eddie Alvarez and Rafael dos Anjos are 3 and 4. Edson Barboza is number 5. Nate Diaz is number 6. You put Nate Diaz up against Edson Barboza, that's an interesting fight. You put Nate Diaz up against Eddie Alvarez, that's an interesting fight. But I think Nate Diaz deserves the next shot at Conor, more so if Khabib or Tony come out of this fight, or both come out of this fight heavily scathed, which I think is a very distinct possibility, being that this fight is a 5-round fight for the UFC interim belt. We could actually have a case where both fighters could be medically suspended to a point where Conor McGregor might be delayed even more. His return could be delayed even more. And I think that if that is the case, they should make that Nate Diaz fight. And Conor likes money, obviously. Nate Diaz wants money. He wants that payday again. So I would try to make that happen. There's no clear-cut say as to who is the better man out of these two. Diaz won by submission. Conor won the second fight by decision. The fashion in which Diaz won the first fight via submission, that's his pedigree speaking for itself. The fashion in which Conor won the second fight was Conor's pedigree speaking for itself. It's even. It's 1-1. I don't want to hear this stuff about Dana White saying that, this fight won't happen because Nate is a massive welterweight. Nate is not a welterweight. That fight was only agreed to at welterweight because of Conor. Conor asked for the fight to be at welterweight because it was on short notice. Nate could have got down lower than that. They just didn't ask him to. And not only that, he's a career lightweight. He was the number 1 contender at lightweight. He fought in a UFC lightweight title fight with Benson Henderson on UFC on Fox. So to say that Nate Diaz is more of a welterweight than a lightweight, that's ridiculous. I think that this fight with Khabib and Tony is fantastic. I think this is a fight that they needed to make. It sells itself, but they need to do Conor versus Nate 3 again. I think it needs to happen within this next year in order for that matchup to have any shelf life. And I know that Dana White is trying his hardest to not make it happen. By making this Khabib versus Tony fight, it's putting Nate Diaz, so to speak, on the back burner. That matchup can fade into the dust along with the first. And Dana White wants people to forget about that. I'm not. That's the fight that I want to see. That's the fight that I think if I walked up to any and every MMA fan, they would say that that's the fight that they want to see. I'd say, what's the best fight of 2016? They would say Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. Would you want to see that again? Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? It's tied 1-1. There's no clear-cut favorite in the third fight. Conor's skills match up with Nate's skills. Nate's skills match up with Conor's skills. You know, whatever Conor is weak at, Nate is strong at. Whatever Nate is weak at, Conor is strong at. So Conor is more of a kickboxer. Nate's more of a boxer. Conor is not well experienced in the jiu-jitsu area. Nate is, but Conor has rare ability to avoid the takedown. So that fight is intricate and it sells itself. The fight with Khabib and Tony sells itself. I'm going to go with Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. His undefeated record speaks for itself. He has had his fair share of injuries, but I think Khabib is very, very motivated to beat Tony Ferguson for this fight. I like Tony Ferguson. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's got a lot of weapons in his arsenal to threaten Khabib Nurmagomedov's undefeated record. I really do. I think this is a really tough fight to pick. But if I'm going with my gut, I'm going to go with Khabib. He has a huge advantage in the wrestling department, and he is very, very skilled at allowing a fighter to think that they might have a chance, but demoralizing them via wrestling and getting the double leg takedown, ground and pound, just really beating them down. Case in point, when he fought Michael Johnson, he told Michael Johnson to quit and to give up while punching him in the face. So that's the level that Khabib Nurmagomedov is on. Tony Ferguson is on a level where he just dispatched Rafael dos Anjos post to post for 5 rounds. So Tony Ferguson is at his highest level. Khabib Nurmagomedov, one could say he's at his highest level. This is one of those fights. This is similar to George St. Pierre and John Fitch. At that time, John Fitch was undefeated. He was running through everyone. Most people thought John Fitch would be a problem for George St. Pierre because John Fitch had the D1 wrestling background. GSP only really had the MMA wrestling background, but GSP just destroyed him due to the fact that he had the quick transition game from the wrestling, from standing to the takedown. That's what GSP was most known for. So it'll be very interesting. I'm going to go with Khabib Nurmagomedov. Hopefully Khabib can get out unscathed virtually, and then they could do the Khabib-Conor fight very quickly, probably within the next few months, maybe June, July, or August. And then, if Khabib does come out of that fight scathed, then maybe they try to put Conor and Nate together again. That's what I would hope for. That was the Thomas Take. I'm Ryan Thomas. Take care.